Watercolor bird, watercolor bird, watercolor bird. Hello, and welcome to the Maggiolly Art Virtual Art Studio. My name is Ricky Shade, and I'll be your instructor today. Our project for today is the watercolor bird, pictured here. I really love this project because it allows us to explore a few different types of art materials and to express our creativity and personalities by creating our own unique birds. For today's project, we're going to use the following materials. One large sheet of watercolor paper, 18 by 24 inches. It's 140-pound cold pressed paper. We're each going to be using one set of pan watercolor paints, they're Yarka brand, one small watercolor palette. We're also each going to have one black oil pastel, a pencil, one round watercolor brush, number 8, and 2 pieces of practice drawing paper. You're also going to want to have a small dish of water and some paper towel to use. Feel free to use materials you've got at home, or give us a call or send us an email and we'll be happy to put together this materials kit for you to pick up at our door. Let's get started. Alrighty guys, we're going to get started. Before we start, I'll just mention that this project is designed for students ages 6 to 12, but we encourage families to work on this together and each create your own unique watercolor bird. So it's fun for the whole family. We're going to start this project with some practice drawing, right? So I'm going to show you how to draw different elements of the bird before we actually draw a bird. And then we're going to work on creating some birds. So some things that are universal to all birds, they've all got beaks, they've all got eyes, and they've all got feathers. So the first thing I'm going to show you is how to draw a few different types of beaks, a few different types of eyes, and then a few different shapes we can use to represent feathers. Okay? We're going to start with the beak. So we're using our pencil and our practice pieces of drawing paper. And so I'm going to show you the simplest beaks first, and then I'm going to show you a few more complicated types of beaks. And so the simplest type of beak to start with is literally just a sideways triangle. Okay? That is a very simple beak. We can make that a little bit more complex. We do the sideways triangle, but then we make it round on the bottom or round on the side instead of flat. And then we can take that even further, and instead of using a triangle, we use a diamond shape. Now with any of these beaks, you could then choose to draw a line going through the middle of the beak to represent the opening of the beak. Okay? So those are 3 very, very simple, kind of similar ways to do beaks. There's also another variation of this type of beak, which I really like. And we can just give our bird, if we choose to, a long, skinny beak, kind of like a hummingbird might have. Okay? So those are a couple very easy types of beaks. And now I'm going to show you one that's a little bit more complex. So just try to follow along with me. Okay, so I'm going to show you what to do on my paper, and you're going to try and copy what I'm doing on your piece of paper and do your best to follow along with my demonstration. Okay, guys? So I'm going to start with the top of the beak, and this line's going to be a little bit complex. So it's going to start at an angle, and then it's going to turn flat, and then it's going to round up a little bit and come down to a point. And then it's going to come up and turn, and it has a little bit of a bump in it there. Okay. Now I'm going to go here and create the bottom of the beak. So it's kind of like curving down, and then it curves up a little bit. Now I'm going to come back up here, and it's got this kind of round shape here, and then it comes down to a point like so. So this is definitely a much more complicated beak than the first one we did. Okay? Do your best to follow along with this. I know it'll be difficult for some of us to do. Okay? I also want to just put a little line in here. And this is kind of like a bird that a bald eagle or a falcon might have. It's a little bit more of a fierce-looking bird beak. So ultimately, it's up to you which beak you want to use in your good copy of the bird. But I just wanted to show you that example because I really like that type of beak. The next type of beak I'm going to show you is a little bit silly, but I really enjoy demonstrating this type of beak. So I'm going to start again at the top of the beak, and it starts at an angle, and then it just comes out quite long to a little point, and then back in. And then the bottom of the beak, it is a pelican beak. So a really big kind of gullet where the pelican collects his fish and then eats them. But this is just another type of beak that you could do, right? So we've got a few very simple beaks. We've got a couple more complicated types of beaks. And if you know another way to draw a beak that you want to try that I haven't demonstrated here, you have total freedom to draw whatever type of beak you'd like, okay? So if you want to pause the video and try drawing other beaks, you can even Google pictures of other birds and try to copy their beaks. You have complete freedom in that sense, okay? But we're going to move on from the beaks now. And I'm going to move on to eyes. So I'm going to show you a few different ways, again, to draw eyes, starting with the very, very simple eye, and then we're going to move to some more complex kind of eyes. So very obviously, the simplest way to do an eye is literally just a circle. Okay, just do your best to do the circle. If it's not perfect, don't be too hard on yourself about it. Okay, and then in the top of that circle, I draw another little circle to represent a reflection of light. And then I'm just going to shade in the big circle. And there we have a very cute, simple eye. Okay? We can make a variation on this by adding 2 circles into the eye. And this will give it a little bit more of a cute look. And I'll just shade that in so you can see what that's going to look like, right? Now, another way that you could make this type of eye a little bit more complex, that's the part that I shaded in would be the pupil of the eye, so the black part of the eye. We can draw a slightly larger circle around that pupil if we want the eye to have a colored part as well, okay? So we're going to take it one step further now, and we're going to create an eye that has an eye socket around it, okay? And so I like to start this type of eye just with a flat line or a straight line, okay? And then what I'm going to imagine, so I'm imagining on this line, I'm finding the halfway point on that line. I'm going to move down, and then starting at the halfway point on that line, but below it, I'm going to draw another line, same size. It's just shifted over to the right a little bit. And then what I'm going to do, guys, is connect and I've created a nice eye socket shape. So the lines I've used to connect those 2 lines are a little bit curved. They're not just a straight line, they've got a bit of an S curve to them to create the eye socket. And now I'm going to fit into that eye socket that circle shape. And now inside of this, you can choose to do the very simple, just black with the white spot. You could do the pupil with the colored part around it. I'm going to show you the more complex version. And so I'm going to do the pupil. And birds' pupils are usually fairly large inside of the eye. So I'm doing the pupil. I'm going to do the reflection of light. And then we can also shade in the rest of the eye socket here. And there you have a nice eye. There's more details I could show you on this, but I don't want to make it too complex, so I'm going to move on to a different way of doing an eye now. So the next type of eye that I want to show you is a really, really cute eye, and it's from a video game. Some of you might know what video game it's from, but just follow along with me here. So I start with a curve like so, okay? And that curve is the bottom of the eye, and on top of that curve, I'm going to put a big sort of arc shape. It's not quite a half circle. It's like it's longer than a half circle, but it is round like a half circle. And then inside of that, I'm going to create the pupil. And so the pupil is an oval, okay? But then the oval has this little, almost like a Pac-Man mouth in it. So, and the oval for the pupil is tucked into the lower left corner of the eye. And then I'm going to put a reflection of light on the pupil and shade it in. And that is a very cute eye, am I right? So if you want your bird to be totes adorbs, you can give it that eye, okay? Now some people don't want their bird to be totes adorbs. Some people want their birds to be fierce and kind of scary looking. So I'll show you how to make a more fierce bird eye. And I like to start with a line, and the line starts flat and then it turns down diagonally quite sharply, and then it just juts out a little bit there. And now under that, I want to add, I'm drawing in this circle, okay, but part of the circle is covered up. So this line represents the upper eyelid and it's covering up part of that circle. And then I'm going to create the lower part of the eye socket like so. And already that eye has a menacing look. And another way to make your eye look a little bit more menacing, instead of a round pupil, you want to give it a pupil shape like that. So it's more of like an almond or a leaf shape, which signifies that it's a predator. And I add the reflection of light. And there we have our more ferocious or fearsome looking eye. We can also shade that in. Okay, so there I've shown you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different types of eyes. And now we're gonna move on to some different shapes that we can use to represent feathers on our bird. So for this, I'm just gonna flip over and really quickly draw an eye. Okay, so now that I've just got a basic eye drawn in, I'm gonna start building some feathers around this eye. And so the first thing I wanna mention is when birds have their feathers, the feathers are not the same size on every part of their body. So typically on the face of the bird, the feathers will be smaller. And then on the body of the bird, the feathers will be larger. So all around the eye, I'm gonna add some smaller feather shapes. And so the first shape I'll show you is really quite simple. It's basically just a triangle kind of shape. And I'm just gonna add these around the eye. And so when they're above the eye, they're gonna kind of be pointing up. And when they're below the eye, they're gonna kind of be pointing down, like that. So that's one type of feather shape. In the next row of feathers, I'll show you a different type of shape. It's gonna be a very similar feather shape, but instead of just being a straight point, it's gonna have a bit of a wave to it. So, like so, I'm still basically doing the same shape. It just has a wave to it, so the line is wavy. And this is a pretty nice feather shape. And one thing you'll notice, now that I'm moving further away from the eye, these feathers are getting a little bit bigger. Right? And then just for the purposes of the demo, I'll just add in that beak there. So the next feather shape I'm going to show you, very simple. It's pretty similar to the first shape. But instead of having a point on the end, it's just going to be a round shape. And again, up here. Right? So when you're doing your bird, guys, you could pick one of these feather shapes and just have the same shape of feather all throughout your bird, or you could have a mixture of feather shapes like I'm doing here. That's totally up to you. But those are 3 very simple feather shapes. You could also do like a more sort of textured feather shape, like so, if you're feeling ambitious. Okay, and once again, now that I've gotten even further away from the eye, sort of more towards the body of the bird, the feathers are starting to get larger. And maybe on the top of the bird's head, he'll have some little floofy feathers giving him a bit of a hairdo there. Okay, and so that's just a quick demonstration of 4 different feather shapes that you could use to create your bird. So I'll just flip over and show you again. We've gone through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different types of beaks, 5 different types of eyes, and 4 different types of feather shapes. So guys, now that we've drawn some beaks and some eyes and some different feather shapes, it's time for us to draw the whole bird. And so when you're drawing the good copy of your bird, it's ultimately going to be up to you what type of beak, what type of eye, what type of feathers your bird has. And all of these different elements of the bird will come together to form the personality, or kind of like the vibe of your bird, right? So think about that as you're doing these practice birds. Think about what you like in these birds, maybe things that you don't like, and what you want to use for your good copy. So I'm going to show you how to draw a few different types of birds, and when I draw any type of animal, I usually like to start with large basic shapes. So I'll figure out a few large basic shapes to create the overall form of the animal, and then I build the details of the animal on top of those basic shapes. So we're going to get right to it. All right, so we're going to start with a circle to represent the bird's head. Don't make it too big or too tiny. And I like to keep my basic shapes very, very light, okay? So there's a circle to represent the head. I'm going to keep this example very simple, so I'm going to use the simplest form of the beak, like so. Okay, and I'm going to use a large oval to represent the body. Okay, now what I want to do from the bottom of the beak is create a line that comes in, and then for the bird's belly, it rounds out a little bit, like so. And then up here on the top, we've got the top of the bird's head, and then it sort of turns in for the neck and then out again for the shoulder. Okay, now we want to give our bird a wing, so I'm just going to go in here and draw this big wing shape. And then I'm going to bring the belly up to connect to the wing shape. And then I'm also going to do, coming down from here, a tail for the bird. Maybe even give it 2 parts to the tail. Okay, now what I can do before I start adding more details is I just want to go in and erase those basic shapes. I no longer need them. They were very helpful for me to get the overall form of the bird. But once we have the sort of shape of the bird drawn in there, we don't need these basic shapes anymore. That's why we kept them really light, so that they're easy to erase at this point. Okay, before I start with the eyes and the feathers, I just want to give my bird a couple little legs, and we're going to keep these very, very simple. So I'm just going to draw sort of 2 straight lines. They're coming down at a bit of an angle here. And then for the bird's foot, I'm just going to do 2 little feet there and 1 little foot on the back side, or 2 little talons, or toes, I should say. And for the leg on the other side, it's going to be coming down opposite, the opposite direction that the previous leg was coming down. Just 2 little toes, like so. So I've got my bird's legs, my bird's feet, he's got a wing, he's got a tail, he's got a beak, and now I'm going to give him his eye. We're going to keep it very simple for this first bird. Okay, and then I can start to decorate my bird with feathers. All right, so I've filled my bird with feather shapes. A couple things I want to point out. Remember, smaller feathers around the eyes, and then as they move away from the eye, they get larger. And on the body and on the body and wing of the bird, they should be quite a bit larger than the ones around the eyes. And I started with round shapes, and then as I moved further down the bird, I just felt inspired to do a bit more of a pointed shape, so it kind of transitioned from round to pointed. Again, on your bird, it's completely up to you what type of feathers you want to use, okay? And so that's one very easy type of bird. I'm just gonna quickly draw a few different birds now for you, so watch closely what I'm doing and try to follow along with me. All right, so I've shown you a few different examples of birds here. If you want to pause the video and go back and rewatch some of these examples, please feel free. You can model your bird based off of one of these examples, or you're free to create your own bird for your good copy. So you have total freedom of what beak you want to use, what eye you want to use, what feathers you want to use. Think about what type of personality you want your bird to have. I've got this like regal, majestic bird here. I've got this kind of kooky looking chicken, and I've got this hilarious, adorable bird with the little body and the big eye and the big beak. So that just goes to show you there's so many different types of birds that you can make. We're also just going to throw up on the screen a few examples of watercolor birds that our creative kids have made in the studio before. So you can see some examples of different birds that have been made by students of mine in the past. And you can pause the video and practice drawing the birds for as long as you'd like, and then join us again. We're going to move on to creating the good copy of our bird on our large sheet of watercolor paper. All right, so we've got our large sheet of 140-pound cold press watercolor paper here in front of us, beautiful paper, to create the good copy of our bird. So based on the practice drawings that you just did, think about which of your practices were your favorite and what you want to do for the good copy of your bird before you start drawing. But you want to follow the same steps to draw your bird. Just make sure that your bird is nice and big, okay? So I'm going to draw my bird now. All right, so now that your bird is drawn, there's a couple other things that we want to add to the picture. So you'll see here in my example, we've got land and we've got sky. So I just want to draw a line to represent the separation between land and sky, okay? Some people have chosen to draw a branch that their bird is sitting on, which you could absolutely do. And then another thing you can do is add a sun in the sky. So in my chicken example here, I purposely made the sun look like a fried egg, but I'm doing more of a like a blue jay type bird this time, so I'm not gonna do a fried egg. I'm just gonna do like a big circle and then this kind of sunburst shape around it. And you can add some clouds if you want. You could draw a little tree. You can get creative at this point and create a setting for your bird. Some people have even done a big bird and then a little baby bird, and some kids decide to add a nest, and you can get really cute and creative, okay? So why don't you pause the video, take a minute to draw your bird, draw the line to separate the land from the sky, draw a sun, and any other decorations you'd like to put in your picture before you move on to the next step. The next step, guys, is you're going to want to take your black oil pastel, and this step might take you a while, so just be patient with yourself, but you need to use this black pastel to trace over all of the lines that you've just drawn, okay? And with the black pastel, it's important to use a nice hard pressure with the pastel to get a solid black line. So I'll show you what I mean. I'm pressing nice and hard with the pastel, and I'm actually moving back and forth with the pastel, so I'm going a few times over each part of the line, and I get this nice solid line, okay? I'll show you what happens if you don't press hard enough with the pastel. You get a really weak, kind of messy looking line. So, So you just want to make sure you press nice and hard with the pastel. You want a really nice solid black line. Okay, so I'm going to do this over the whole drawing, over every line that I've drawn. And one other thing I want to mention, guys, when you're doing the eye, so I'll just demonstrate the eye now. So when you're doing the eye, okay, you can also then use the black pastel to shade in the eye. So I outline all of the shapes of the eye, and then that black pupil of the eye, I want to shade it in, nice and dark, filling in all the white space, okay? And now I'm going to go through my bird, and I'm going to outline everything with black. Okay guys, I've outlined all of the elements of my bird with the oil pastel. You'll probably notice as you're going, like, holy moly, my wrist is getting tired. Please take breaks as you go along. Shake off your hands, stretch your arms, maybe get up and do a walk around. It'll be really tough on the wrist doing this whole thing, so definitely take some breaks if you need to. When you're done, we can put our pencil and our oil pastel aside, and we're ready to start painting. Woo! Really, this is the most fun part of the whole project, and when you're painting your bird, you have complete freedom with the colors you choose. It's important to try and think about your colors and maybe try to come up with a color scheme. So you could, for example, do a rainbow bird. You could pick a couple colors that go well together. So some good choices might be like sunset colors. So you could pick red, orange, and yellow. You could pick cool colors instead, like blue, green, and purple. You could do earth tones. It's totally up to you. You can also think about types of birds that exist in nature and the color schemes that those birds have and pull inspiration from that. We're going to be using watercolor paints for this project. It is the watercolor bird after all. And the big secret, it's not a secret at all, with watercolors is you need to use water with the paint. So never try to paint, even if it's a tube watercolor or a pan watercolor, never try to just paint with the paint. That's not how they're designed to work. You have to have lots of water with your color so that it's fluid, because the water is the vessel that holds the color and it's going to help the color stain the page. So why don't we get started painting? So take your paintbrush and start by dipping it in your water. Okay, I'm going to then just take some of this water and put it into one of these wells in my palette. And maybe I'll even do 2 dips of water here. I'm going to start with the color blue. And so what I'm going to do is just swirl my brush into the paint here. And, oh, that's a purple. Oh my gosh. I'm going to start with blue, so I'm going to take some water here. And I think this one's the blue, yeah. There we go, some nice blue, okay? So I was actually going to use purple as well, so it's working out for me. So I've added color to the water, right? I'm not just painting with the paint itself, I'm taking the paint and I'm adding it to my water, and that's how this watercolor paint's going to work for us. I'm going to add a little bit more of the color to it, just to make it a little bit more vibrant. And I'm going to start with maybe this feather here on the top. So this first feather, I'll paint it all a solid color just so you can see. It's really lovely the way these watercolor paints go on. And so here I've made this nice solid blue color. Okay? Now, if I wanted my color to be lighter, I'm just going to add more water. So I'll show you an example of that. So I'm going to take more water from my dish, maybe 2 more dips of water here. And now we can see this next feather I paint is a lot lighter. So if you're going for a lighter color palette, just add more water to your color. Now, say for example, I wanted to make a more vibrant color. I'm just going to take a lot more paint, so a lot more of this paint from the pan here, and less water. And now you'll see this next feather I paint is a lot more of a vibrant color. So now you know how to get more vibrant colors and lighter colors with your watercolors, okay? There's a few more things I'm going to show you. So watercolors blend together really beautifully. So I'm going to paint a feather here. I'm just cleaning off my brush for a minute. I'm going to paint a feather here that is blue and purple, okay? So I'll start maybe with my vibrant blue here. And I'm going to paint half of the feather with this blue. I'm going to clean off my brush in the water, just swishing it around a little bit. And maybe I'll take some more of this purple here. And I'll paint the other half of the feather purple. I'm going to leave a little bit of white space between them. Okay? I'm going to clean off my brush. And I'll just dry it off on a bit of paper towel here. And watch this. I'm just going to swish the colors together. And now we have this beautiful blend between the purple and the blue. Okay? And you can do this really with any colors. It's nice to pick colors that would be beside each other on the color wheel because they'll mix together nicely. So it's ultimately up to you. You could paint all of your feathers with solid colors. You could make all of your feathers be multicolored. It's totally your decision. There is one thing I want to mention. It's probably a good idea to paint the beak either orange or yellow. So I'll just maybe do my beak a yellow for this bird. And maybe I'll put some yellow in there, a little bit more water. And I'm actually going to take some of this yellow ochre color, which is really nice, and mix it into that. So you can mix more than one color up in your palette to create a mixed color. And so it's just toned down that yellow a little bit. I want to make the color a little bit darker here. A little bit more vibrant. There we go. Nice. Okay. And I just want to show you a couple more little tips or things you can do. So I'm going to take some blue and I'm going to paint a feather blue. Okay. I'm gonna dry off my brush. And then another thing that's cool that you can do, so when a feather is wet, maybe I'll take some more purple and I'm just going to gently drop some purple in there. And it's going to disperse into the water, and as that dries, it's going to create some interesting textures. So you can also create cool patterns and designs and textures inside of your feather like that. Okay guys, so I'm going to go ahead and paint the rest of my bird, and you can watch me do that, and then once I'm done that, you can start to paint yours. All right, so I've painted my bird with all these beautiful blues and purples, and I've done some splattering, and I made a little bit of an oopsie there, but that's okay. I was just trying to add some interesting textures into my feathers, and as this dries, the watercolor paint is gonna like pool around and do interesting things and make some cool textures. You might be wondering why I used an oil pastel to outline all of the shapes of my bird. You may have heard a saying before that oil and water don't mix, and this is very true. The reason I use oil pastel to outline all my shapes is because oil pastel repels the water. So when you paint your watercolor inside of the shapes that have been outlined with the oil pastel is going to shrug off the water, and it's going to keep the watercolor paint inside of the shape. So it's almost like we're creating a resist with the oil pastel to hold the water into the shape that we want it in, so that our colors don't all bleed together. So that's why we've used oil pastel to outline our shapes. So now we're going to move on to painting the ground, just with a nice green color. I mean, obviously, if you're trying to create a different scene, you could use a different color for the ground, but I'm just going to demonstrate with a simple green grass scene. So again, guys, I'm just taking a bunch of water and putting it into one of these wells here. If you've used up all of your wells and they're all filled with colors and you don't have any room for green, maybe you can go and wash off your well in the sink and have a fresh start. So I've got some water in here, and I'm going to take some of this nice green now. And for the grass, I want to start with a really, really light color. So I'm actually going to take a bunch more water into here. Get a good amount of water, add a little bit more green. And I want to start by painting the whole grass just with a wash of this light green. All right, so now that I've got this wash of light green, I want to make a more vibrant green, so I'm just going to add more color to it. And we're going to start to add some texture to our grass. So if you want, you can go in with grassy strokes like this to give the illusion of grass. But ultimately, it's up to you what type of texture you want to add. So I'll show you a couple other different ways. You could literally just take your vibrant green and just create a random texture like that, right? It's different than the grassy strokes, but it still gives an impression of texture, which is quite nice. Another way you could do it is you could splatter. Splattering does run the risk of getting splatters where you don't want them, so be careful if you're going to take that route. You can splatter just by flinging your brush. You can also tap your brush on your finger, okay? And you could also use a mixture of these methods to create texture in your grass, much like my picture will have here. You'll notice in my example to the left, I kept it a lot simpler with the texture in the grass, and you could do that too. I just wanted to show you all the different options that you have here to get creative and have fun with the watercolor paints, because they really are a lot of fun when you start to add textures and things like this to them. Some places I'm going to use a much darker color. Some places I'll keep it lighter. Whatever you feel, really. All right, and as that texture dries, it's going to sort of dissipate a little bit. You can even sort of go through with some water and just sort of swish it all together and sort of unify it a little bit more if you'd like to. Or you can leave it how you've got it. It's your painting, so you're the boss. You decide what you want it to be. Okay, so there's my ground, and I'm going to move on to the sky now. So before I do the blue sky, I just want to paint my sun. And I'm going to make it yellow in my picture. You could make it yellow, you could make it orange, you could make it red, you could make it a mixture of yellow, orange, and red. It's totally up to you. In fact, maybe I'll show you that because that'd be fun. So I'll do the inner circle yellow. Okay, then I'm going to take orange and add it into there. And I'll make it orange around the circle. Okay, then maybe I'll clean off my brush. I'll take a little bit of red here. And I'll make the ends of these sun rays red. Just having fun with it. Don't be afraid to just go for it, and if you have a cool idea, just try it out. What's the worst that could happen, right? All right, I love how that sun has turned out, and now I'm going to start with the blue sky. So I'm just swishing off my brush here, and I've already got a well that had blue in it, so I'm going to keep going with that well. And guys, when I do the sky, I want to start with a very vibrant blue, so I'm going to add lots of this paint into my well here. Okay, and so maybe I'll start at the top of my sky. And I'm going to start in the corner with this vibrant blue. And now I'm going to add water to it. And add water. So as I get closer and closer to the bird, I'm adding more water to my color. And closer to the bird, I want the color to be a lot lighter so that the bird stands out more. We don't want our bird to get swallowed up in this dark sky. We want to keep it nice and light. So there's one corner of the sky, so I need to make a vibrant blue now for the next corner. And here we go. So nice and vibrant up in the corner. And again, I'm just going to gradually add more blue to the color. Sorry, not more blue, more water to the color. So that it's nice and light around the bird. Okay, and I'm basically going to do the same thing around all the rest of the sky, trying to keep the more vibrant color around the edge of the sky and have it all lighter in the middle here. Alright, so I've got my base layer down in my sky, and now I'm going to have some fun adding some textures to it and just getting a little bit wild with the paint. This is our last step, so this is our chance to really kind of have some fun with it. I'm going to just add some texture into the sky. I'm just going to like dab some blue around. All right, and I'm pretty happy with how that's looking. Obviously, as it dries, the paint's gonna mingle, textures are gonna happen. One of the things you have to understand when you're painting with watercolors is that you're not in total control. The water is gonna have a mind of its own and sort of take over at some point. I'm really happy with what I did. I added lots of textures, I did some splatters, I left it nice and light around the bird so that the bird stands out. I've got my nice vibrant orange sun to contrast the blues. I've got some grass texture happening down here. So I'm really happy with how my project turned out. Well, that's it, guys. Thank you so much for joining us for this watercolor bird art project at the Maggiolly Virtual Art Studio. I'm really excited to see what you've done. So please, when you're finished your watercolor bird, take a picture and post it on Instagram. Tag us at Maggiolly Art. My name is Ricky Shade. It's been a pleasure leading you through this project. Everybody stay creative and happy painting. Happy painting, happy painting, happy painting.